You've reached the Signal Watch, movies, television, comics, and more. I'm your host, Ryan Steens. Join me and our cadre of co-contributors as we examine cultural artifacts of the 20th century, boldly explore the 21st, and try to put it all in perspective. Stay tuned. We're gonna try to make this work. Hey everybody, and welcome back to the Signal Watch. As always, I'm your host, Ryan Steens, and with me today is
Stephen Harms.
Welcome back, Stephen. It's been a minute.
It's been a minute, but I'm always glad to talk movies here at the Signal Watch.
I know you tapped in Mike.
Yes.
Did you know that was happening?
He mentioned it a long time ago, and similar to you, he had introduced me to The Raid and Raid Redemption. Just one night visiting him in Houston, many moons ago, and it's like, wow, that is one taut, tight, action-packed action movie. Like I haven't seen anything like that. Really ever.
Yeah.
So when he said that he was going to talk to you about that, I was like, oh, this is going to be a great pairing. And for my money, it is one of your finest episodes because it was very obvious that you're both fans, but you both just like kept making it more exciting as you talked it through. So I really enjoyed it.
Awesome. I'm really glad. It was a super fun time. And I didn't know how it was going to go. I just don't know Mike very well. I'd only met him at your wedding and like maybe one other time. And
right.
But anyway, it was a lot of fun. If you haven't heard that episode, it was a couple episodes back. So just look for The Raid in the timeline or whatever on the blog. But today we are talking about a 2011 movie that I don't think has really been forgotten. I think people are still aware of it, but it is, as things do, disappearing into the rearview mirror. And that movie is what, Stephen?
This would be Drive by, if I hope I don't butcher this, I believe this is Nicholas Winding Refn's picture as well.
Yeah, it's. You said you did or did not see it in the theater?
I did not see it in the theater. In fact, I don't even think I was aware that it had come out until I saw your lovely better half doing a Halloween send-up as this character in the silverback jacket with a scorpion on it with a hammer. And I was like, what's that about? And then when I saw a poster from Drive, I was like, oh, she's doing an homage to that. And that kind of honestly like made me go, oh, maybe I should check that out. So that was how I actually found out about Drive. But I think I may have missed the theatrical release entirely.
I did see it. I remember being pretty excited about it coming out. I remember seeing the trailers at the Alamo, and then I saw it downtown at the Alamo at the Ritz when it came with Matt and Nicole when it came out. And at the time, I looked at it, saw the trailer, and was like, okay, I think I get what they're doing. Like, it's a neo-noir. It's also not just a neo-noir, it's a neo-noir that is like referencing 1970s and 1980s kind of movies that are all vibe, like Michael Mann directed stuff, and a lot of that kind of stuff that was coming out for a bit that was kind of the opposite of like what Cannon was putting out. And it would often be kind of low budget, but I'd say American Gigolo kind of falls into that world. And some other movies like that, where soundtrack is super important. The photography basically tells the story. And so, and it, when I walked out of the theater, I was pretty jazzed. I don't remember how the rest of the crew took it. Then I bought it on DVD or Blu-ray at Target, watched it once, and I honestly haven't seen it since. It is a movie that a lot of these that don't have overly complex plots, just kind of like I can access it from my RAM and just kind of play scenes in my head, and I'm good.
Right.
But you saw it then, I guess, on cable or Blu-ray or something, then?
Yeah, probably, yeah, something like that. Or ordered it streaming. This is far enough into the modern era that you can start to rent movies, through streaming. But yeah, as I remember definitely watching it, when I was living in downtown San Francisco, and it definitely felt like a movie that had a vibe, and it was definitely the kind of movie that you wanted to watch on the right kind of night, kind of maybe wet, rain slick streets and neon. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Is that the vibe in the movie definitely calls for a certain vibe outside of the movie. And you're absolutely right. Looking at like adjacent kind of noirs of that era, you had like The Lookout with Joseph Gordon-Levitt, which I think is 2010 or so. It wasn't a widely received movie, but it did well enough, amongst a few indie fans that I know. So you're absolutely right that there's like this kind of like neo-noir kind of gestalt lurking around there. But this absolutely, you're right. Again, embrace that pink neon kind of aesthetic that Michael Mann really put forth with the Miami Vice TV movie, and it kind of defined sight, sound, and yeah, vibe as being a core part of what can make a movie a movie.
Yeah, and kind of like leading up to it, you'd mentioned like there's so much dead space in this film.
Yes,
and that's something I think is kind of key to exploring, and kind of talking about that, and it kind of, I do want to run headlong at it, but I do think we need to do a quick plot synopsis.
Absolutely.
And I think it's pretty easy. This movie is not overly complicated. It's a guy works in a garage part-time, and part-time does stunts in Hollywood. And a Carey Mulligan moves down the hall from him, and is his non-manic pixie dream girl down the hall, who happens to have a young son. And they become pals with possibly the potential for more, but there's a husband who's off in prison, who then shows up in the form of a handsome Oscar Isaac.
Amazing.
Yes, it was funny because I'd kind of forgotten he was in it till I was getting ready to watch it, and of course he shows up on screen because Jamie wasn't looking at the credits when it started. She's like, "Holy shit, that was always Oscar Isaac," and I was like, "Yeah, that's our guy."
Yes.
And anyway, turns out he's in trouble with the Albanian mob or some mob, and in order to keep him and the family from getting killed, the driver, played by Ryan Gosling, who said he did stunts and he did this other stuff, but what his real thing is, the reason he's integral to the story, is he is a driver for getaways from heists. And so he'll give you 5 minutes and he's yours, but after that, before or after, you're not, he's done with you, but for 5 minutes he will get you out of there. So he says, "Okay, I'll help you out with this," and he just signs up to be a part of that. And spoiler, things go south during the heist that he's supposed to be doing. It's supposed to be $40,000, a briefcase carried by Christina Hendricks, shows up with $1 million, and poor Oscar Isaac sees the end of the world for him. His storyline ends abruptly, and then mob mayhem ensues, and the driver has to take out people one by one. The driver has no name; he is only known as the driver. Carey Mulligan is known as Irene, and Christina Hendricks is Blanche, who is only in the movie for about 5 minutes. But it's Christina Hendricks, so she's going to get a nod on this podcast. So anything I'm missing out on, Stephen, that you think is crucial?
No, I think you're right. The only other outstanding kind of piece of casting that might have slipped by was Bryan Cranston. Then maybe 3-4 seasons into Breaking Bad, right as Walt is about to make that kind of turn from, wow, Malcolm in the Middle's dad is kind of quirky, to, oh my God, this is King Lear. He's right in that middle of that moment. And you can definitely see that the the great powers of thespianism are coming to Cranston's aid as he plays this kind of hard luck boss to Gosling, or the driver rather. But you can also see that he also had something that the driver once had, and he's lost it because of a shattered pelvis. And we don't find out until much later how that happened. But he plays this by turns, like sad sack case, noble case, protector, father, and then a horribly tortured victim. He does all those turns, and so I that's a performance that I think just kind of really anchors a lot of the pieces of the story that you just recounted. Is like how does the stuntman find this robbery opportunity, and it's this back behind the scenes kind of boss who runs the garage, played by Cranston. The character's called Shannon throughout the film.
And Shannon in turn answers to Albert Brooks, who is playing a mob boss. It's a completely bizarre turn for Brooks, who is amazing in it. You don't realize that neurotic intensity he has can be completely flipped to this weird, deadly confidence.
Absolutely.
And he is paired with Ron Perlman, who is playing a role unlike anything else I've ever seen Perlman play, which is bouncing off the walls as a kind of clearly the guy who normally has to take care of the dirty business, but is not all that bright about how he's doing it.
Yeah, I think, absolutely. My biggest familiarity with Perlman would be as Hellboy. And here he's just so cool and icily menacing. And that he has that great voice, and he has that face that seems to be just bigger than most faces are. And watching him, and it's kind of germane to the plot. He talks about being a Jewish gangster under the employ of the Italian mob on the East Coast, and he talks about some tensions there. And just that menace of his sense of isolation paired with his physicality. It's like you just know that he's one insult away from just snapping necks, and his menace just glowers through the entire second act. It's a pretty powerful performance.
So we just mentioned a whole lot of plot.
A lot of plot,
but it's an interesting movie because there's a lot of ellipses between lines. People very clearly state like, this is a problem because of X, and it's going to have to be dealt with because of Y. And so it doesn't leave a ton of ambiguity there. But I do think that there is a lot of ambiguity that ends up working its way into the spaces in between. But I guess by that, I mean, the driver is a character who now, at the time, we probably would have said we're describing that he's on the spectrum or something. And I don't know that is not right. He's a character who doesn't ever really say anything about what he wants. He doesn't say, what he's interested in. He seems to definitely be falling in line most of the time behind Shannon. And it seems like we're catching him at the inflection point of maybe Irene is the first thing he's wanted in some great amount of time, other than whatever is going on with him and his need to drive and kind of prove himself through his ability to drive, which seems to be what he's good at and the only thing he really feels he can relate to. And maybe I'm reading too much into that, but that was kind of my takeaway from what I saw in the film.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I'd never considered that it might be, his sort of flat affect might be some sort of a neuroatypicality. I think that's a really interesting supposition. This time when I watched it, I tried to figure out like why he had this kind of level of just silence. Why there's so much just dead air in the movie, and I started to wonder if maybe I was trying to think, maybe is this perhaps like maybe like a samurai movie? Is he sort of a Bushido practitioner? Is he a Ronin? Is this like car thing a thing for him where he's put his life in this sense of a code, whatever he has, he never expresses it, but it almost seems like he has this orienting principle, or he has a certain set of ethics. He's there for the 5 minutes. He doesn't carry a weapon. Before, no. After no. During, yes. like I almost kind of got like the sense of like he has this weird kind of like logical moral code that defines him. And I thought that, just as part of the samurai kind of tough guy act, he didn't talk much. But on the other hand, like that doesn't seem to be entirely consistent, because Gosling smiles an awful lot. He seems like they'll have these long dialogues and then he won't say anything. And then he just starts smiling, and that's the only answer. And I was like, I am not quite sure how to read this. I think you're right. It could be some sort of neuroatypicality, but he's also just sort of mysterious and inexplicable. And I find it's very hard to forget the performance.
Yeah, I mean, I think you can go to movies like Les Samurai, which Justin and I talked about a couple of years ago. And it's something that you see in hitman movies quite a bit. The guy lives in squalor or in a very plain apartment, and has his kind of code, his kind of like, it enables the audience to get interface with those hitmen, because we're like, well, he can't be all bad like a complete psychopath, because he does have these rules that he goes by, even though you could kind of read those rules half the time as completely arbitrary and just something that you have to have so that the movie makes sense. But I do think that in Les Samurai, similarly, like the lead character just does not talk very much. He's just kind of experiencing what's going on, and of course, much like this movie, things kind of turn on their side, and then they're taken out of their comfort zone. Very rarely in these movies are you seeing a slice of life in the day of an assassin, so you only ever usually catch those characters at the end of the trail for whatever they're up to. And I think that this movie does something similar, but the way the film ends is significantly different, in that the assassin movies almost always end with the assassin dead and the woman living, or whoever the love interest was in the film. And I think that it's borrowing somewhat from that, and I think that probably Michael Mann, in his own way, the movie. There's two movies that get called out quite a bit when this movie was released, and one was Thief, which was a Michael Mann movie from about 1981, starring James Caan, Tuesday Weld, Willie Nelson's in it. I'm trying to remember who else is in it. I tried to watch it last night to prepare, but I was texting with Simon. I was like, I'm watching Thief right now. And he's like, you're never going to make it. It's too late. I was like, yeah. And I didn't. I was like, I'm exhausted in this movie. Like, if you think this movie has slow pacing, Drive has slow pacing, Thief is like Stalker. It's like,
wow. Okay.
It's as Simon described it, hypnotic. And so I didn't actually make it. I just went to bed. But, the other movie was The Driver. That one was called out, and that's a Ryan O'Neal movie. Yeah. And Bruce Dern. The movie's very different, but about something very similar, which is a driver for heist. But in that one, it's a cat and mouse game between Ryan O'Neal, who is very similar to Ryan Gosling, but he is being pursued by a dirty cop who's trying to take him down. But similarly, Ryan O'Neal in that film does not talk much, doesn't really express what he's up to or what he wants a whole lot, except for Isabella. Who
Isabella Johnny. Wow.
Johnny, wow. Yeah. I almost said Armin, and I was like, that's not right. Anyway, those were kind of the two that got called out quite a bit. But there were a lot of movies that came out for a bit, and the soundtrack kind of echoes back to a lot of those, with the college song is the one everybody remembers was
sure.
Real Hero. And so that was where I was like, oh, they're really trying to do this whole like Michael Mann, Tangerine Dream, keyboard homage, keyboard music homage. I think it was an interesting movie when it came out, because I felt like people who were younger than us did not understand at all what the movie was. That was, and I spent some time doing some reading, some articles, kind of preparing for this, and there people write about this movie fairly consistently. Like someone's like, time to revisit, Drive, like every 2 or 3 years, and somebody writes something. And the fascinating thing is, I mean, the movie leaves a lot of blank spaces, a lot of ellipses. I know what I think happens in the film. Was how many people were describing the film, and I was like, what movie did you watch? They were describing, one person was like, it's very clear that what Ryan Gosling wants is to be a movie star. And I was like, what are you even talking about? Like his character, the driver.
Yeah, right.
And I was like, the character does not want, there's no sign. He never has a script around. There's no movie posters. There's no sign at all that this is true. The other one was describing it as Shannon was his mentor. I was like, Shannon's not his mentor. Shannon's his exploiter.
Yeah.
He's very clear about this.
Right.
But people kind of bring their own stuff to when they're watching a movie. Anyway, it was interesting. But I do think, visually, there's a lot of parallels between what Michael Mann was doing through the kind of 80s. And if you see like Manhunter or some of his other stuff, kind of what this film was up to with it's an interesting period too, because you're about 5 years out from the flip to digital photography.
Yeah, I think what you bring up is something that I loved about the movie. There is, and I think Thief mastered this as well, and I think Mon's done a pretty good job with this. But there is something uniquely special about nighttime in Los Angeles. It just comes like darker and swifter than you could ever imagine it. I think it's the way the ocean and the desert work together. But I've rarely seen a director really understand how to use LA's night as a framing device. I think you see, like, I think about places where it's done really, really well. I would, oddly enough, I think Valley Girl does an amazing job of it. Nick Cage kicking around really captures. It's like, it feels like it's 3 a.m, but really it's only like 8 p.m. You're like, you're just always thrown off by just how deep and dark the night is. And I also think that like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, when Leonardo DiCaprio's character and Brad Pitt's character go to like, some lounge somewhere, it's just, I'm like, is it 3 a.m? Is it just 9 p.m? I can never tell how deep and how dark that night is. And I think, the opening heist that opens the film, again, I'm not sure if it happened. It feels like to me it's happening at 2 in the morning. But then the great switcheroo is that he pulls into an LA Clippers game to ditch the cops, and you're like, well, so that wasn't 2 a.m. It was probably
like
9:30
at night.
Yeah. And so I think just the working with that depth of night is something that I think Refn really understood what LA feels like. And I think that's underscored by, for example, like the driver in his cars, and this, he never has anything digital. It's all analog. It's all gears and gauges, and it kind of puts you in the place where the driver is really about feel, is like his understanding about a car is, he's driving all these like big block engine hot rods. Mm-hmm. He's in this depth of night, and he's almost doing it like blindfolded. He's doing it by feel. The way he interacts with the car it's like, I don't want to sound too JG Ballard here, but it is there's an eroticism to his relationship to the vehicles and to his presence as a leading man in these cars. And then all that's framed in this just like infinite blackness of LA night, which I think really sets the stage for like, oh, this is a vibe. You get the college soundtrack or the Chromatics track. I think it opens with Chromatics' Tick of the Clock song, and you're just like, this is intense, but it's also expansive, and it's also like muscular, but it's also just dwarfed by the environment. And I think it really creates an odd feeling that I can't recall many or even any other movies really nailing. So I think absolutely right. It is a movie about vibe, and like the night and the specifically the LA night is as much a character as I think Gosling or Irene.
Yeah, one of the things that as they end up doing through the film, and I'm not sure I have an answer as to what it is, other than kind of it is what it is. In kind of the post 2006, as we kind of rolled into the digital age, you'll see a lot of stuff on YouTube about like, why do movies from this period look like this or look like that? And one of the things this film does is it brings into things that the digital age kind of did together on the screen simultaneously. And that's basically this peachy color and then blue, a kind of light blue. And to me, the peachy color continually looks like something that people are going to have less and less reference to, which is sodium lights, that you kind of see whenever you were driving around cities. It's the color I associate with my own 20s and late night driving and street lamps and everything. And a lot of films ended up like Dune when it came out a couple of years ago is essentially that color in every shot, except for everything on the original. I'm sorry, I'm having like Dune. What's the first planet that they're on? It's not Arrakis.
Caladan.
Yeah, that one is a very different color palette. But as soon as they hit Dune, it's all this kind of peach color. And then other movies, you'll see there's kind of this blue hue that kind of ends up covering up. It's kind of like you get those, or then you end up getting that weird metallic Zack Snyder-y gray. And those are kind of it's this weird artifact of what's happened with digital that I don't entirely understand of you used to have to do all of that through post-processing in the film era. But once you get into the digital era, he's able to show both. And you go into Irene's apartment and it depends what's going on in the scene, in which angle they're showing the scene from, and her walls are peach and they're blue. And kind of depending on what's going on, there will be sometimes solid blue behind the characters if something kind of negative is starting to happen, and then there's this kind of like other hominess of it being peach. And so when they're driving through talking out my ass here, but when they're driving through the streets, there will be in the same shot, and this is when he's with Irene, this kind of blue and peach kind of winding through the shots. Well, he's with Irene, who she's a married woman who's married to a guy who's a criminal. All of this is going to lead to very bad shit for the both of them. And I think in its own way, it's its own foreshadowing. I think I could write a very good essay on this for like RTF 301. But I do think that was some of what they're playing with. But you said something about Refn being colorblind, and I was like, wait, what? And I had to totally back off from everything I just said.
Yeah, I was he seems to have in the source that I found, he said he likes to he needs high contrast to see it, or else he doesn't really perceive the color palette shift. So yes, he seems to have volunteered that. And for me, the iconic color of Drive is that sort of pink neon, and it's not like a thin neon like what you'd see in like Michael Mann's like Miami Vice. It's something a little thicker. It's closer to Pepto-Bismol than it is I don't know, just a light. And the fact that he chooses this, and you're absolutely right. I mean, the scenes where Irene and the driver and her son are going down the LA spillway, that looks almost shot in like Kodachrome. It's so vivid. The moment where they kind of have this idyll and this kind of like oasis, that seems Kodachrome. And then we go back to this very, very sort of like digital kind of cold thing, which is either dominated by the sort of Pepto pink or the some sort of I don't know, like slurpy blue kind of like palette. It's shockingly cold, and just those palettes and their contrast to each other, it just really makes it stands out. I think about like other scenes where you see. I'm pretty sure that Irene, or the apartment they're using for locations, is somewhere in West Hollywood. But there's several points where you can see through the windows of her apartment, or you never really see through the driver's windows in his place. But you see it, and you kind of see that deep LA night. You see billboards, and just the light is just such an intense part of scene setting. The dialogue is spare to Spartan. And the scene's setting, it's like an oak table, maybe some kids macaroni art to imply that there's a kid here, and then just color. And I just think that's so staggering the way that color has been used to basically replace like set dressing throughout the movie. It was really a remarkable kind of way of telling the story, I thought.
Yeah, I'd also want to go in and dive into when the few times they do use red. Definitely in the strip club, when he goes after Cook. I am not convinced that Blanche being a redhead is not part of that.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly Nino's Pizzeria has kind of the black, white, and red motif as you would in a pizzeria. I don't remember. I did not do a mental check on what the inside of the restaurant was, the Chinese restaurant at the end was. But yeah, I mean,
Lucky Red. The
yeah,
red's
that's my
definitely a heavy color.
assumption.
Yeah,
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 I don't want to read too much onto it, but I assume that's true. So there's this thing that they're doing with when we talk about like there being a sparsity of dialogue. I don't think there's ever a time when the movie's not talking at us. I just think it's like leaning over the chair and whispering into your ear, like what's going on with these characters and kind of what's going on with the story. It has this kind of, dime novel crime book plot. It's based on a book, which I've not read. I didn't even realize it was based on a book till this viewing. But it is, I think that there's a lot going on with just kind of how the movie is using those vibes to kind of tell us what is going on with the driver and what's going on with Irene, certainly. And Carey Mulligan is perfect casting for that. If Gosling, like giving a small smile, feels like the violins are rising, then Carey Mulligan gives a little smile and she uses her big eyes to look at someone warmly, and you're just like, oh, I get it. I get why he's gonna like throw everything away for this.
yeah, yeah. But I'm astounded by it. But you're absolutely right. Is I once was talking to a friend of mine who's a drummer, and I said, well, who's your favorite drummer? He said Ringo Starr. I was like, but Ringo never, Ringo's not Neil Peart. Ringo's not like an Alex Van Halen type. He doesn't do everything, all the fills. And he said, no, but he always did exactly what was appropriate. I'm like, that's it. And he's like, what more would you want? Like it's Sergeant Pepper. He's not going to do a John Bonham like drum solo here. That's not appropriate. He always knew how to serve the piece. And I really feel that like you're saying, it's like, Mulligan's kind of like wry smile while she's wearing her Denny's name tag. Says a lot. And I think, the point where there's an interesting confrontation where the recently returned from prison Oscar Isaac is kind of checking to see what the level of relationship between the driver and Irene was, and it's kind of pulling out some caveman grade, like masculine, like how do you measure up, son, kind of aggression on the driver, and the driver just kind of just lets it flow over him, and he's like, oh yeah, this is what you'd do if you just got out of prison and you're a violent dude. I'll just nod and then smile, and I'll make him mad, and that's all I need to do. The movie refreshingly refuses just like the tropes or the types that you would expect in a dime store heist novel. Is that you'd expect that the driver's got to be like, well, like I'll show you how I'm a man, either with a hammer with my 442 or the switchblade I keep in my boot. But his masculinity is just like rooted somewhere else, and it's almost unassailable. I think that makes him such an intriguing character, particularly when Oscar Isaac, just a truly gifted thespian, is kind of squaring off against him. It's like every time that Isaac turns up the intensity, Gosling just kind of cools it off, and it's a really interesting dynamic that I don't think we really see in other films.
Yeah, I remember being struck the first time I saw the film as to, I didn't know it was Oscar Isaac at the time, but this guy playing Standard was so believable, and he absolutely has the capacity for extreme violence with whoever this guy is who he thinks is moving in on his woman, and you could see all the layers there of, I know I haven't been around, that's on me, and I feel guilty about it, but I don't know if I'm processing it that way. And there's like all this stuff, like, and of course the basic caveman, like you're moving in on my woman stuff, but doing it all through that like friendly thing that I don't know, all guys know. Like
Mhm.
you start hearing someone start asking you questions from a certain angle, and you're like, this guy's looking to see if he should fuck me up right now.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and you do need to absolutely, like, you don't want to roll over on your back and expose your belly. But at the same time, if you start beating your chest, it's gonna get bad.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
And so those scenes struck me, and to play that character, and yet you still care about Standard.
Hmm.
He's clearly been through some shit, and he got in over his head. He's a noir character who doesn't make it to the end of the film.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's a really, to me, a really strong performance in the very small amount of time he's given, and with what he's given to do. The casting on this, like we were saying at the beginning, is absolutely insane.
And I think you're absolutely right. That what's even more fascinating is that within 5 minutes of screen time, Sander is going to be calling the driver his friend, because he's going to basically on Irene's account, or on their son Benizio's account, the driver is going to help him do a very inadvisable heist. And so it's interesting to see him move from this me, ugh, my cave, my woman kind of thing. He's going to move from that to like genuine humility and appreciation. And I was like, is he playing a role? Is he just kind of like stringing the driver along? It's like, no, I think it's actually genuine. He kind of realizes, oh wow, this is somebody who would do the best thing for my son, if perhaps only to get to his mother. But he's in such dire straits. Okay, I'll take friends where I can get them, and that ultimately kind of leads to very, very unfortunate heist.
Yeah, yeah. It's but yeah, I just feel like there's so much stuff in this movie that's like that. Cranston's character Shannon almost never says, at least for his first few lines, what he's actually up to, and the driver constantly is, can get him to actually say, whatever with a look or whatever. He doesn't have to go, oh, you're full of shit, man, like you would in a lesser film, right? There's so much just going on with, and there's not many, that maybe there are, but how many movies do you see where an actor gets a chance to do everything like that through looks, through kind of subtlety and nuance? It was one of the things when I was watching Mad Men, that was one of my favorite things about the show. It ended up, if you went on to fan blogs, and I talk about this all the time to other people, but if you went on to Mad Men fan blogs, people were watching the show incorrectly because they left room for interpretation. And people and there's a reason Marvel movies are all 2.5 to 3 hours long. It's because they don't want to leave any room for ambiguity.
Yeah.
They've realized that's kind of how you end up losing an audience. So they explain everything that's happening, so you never miss a beat or what a character is feeling, and to do that artfully is very hard. It ends up taking time. Their movies are very long. This movie is very brief. It does a lot through gesture, nuance, lighting, music, all these things. What it doesn't do it through is necessarily what people are saying to each other, except for Nino and Albert Brooks. So
Yeah, that is very interesting. Let me ask you this: do you have a favorite scene? Or is it the whole thing, or is there a part that really kind of captures what the what the charm of vibe is
when Christina Hendricks walks away?
That's which time? Because there's a couple of those.
No, I think the two most artfully done scenes are the ones that made I think the millennials watching this movie, to be candid, lose their mind, which were the hammer in the dressing room scene and the elevator sequence, which the small amount of reading I did, I think was widely misunderstood. It was kind of weird reading that, people reacting to that scene and going, oh, it's this moment of complete passion. I'm like, for one of them,
that's interesting.
This is a scene about a guy who's like, I am kissing her goodbye because it's all over now. The illusion, any chance I ever had, whatever illusions I had about the life that I was going to have with this woman and with everything that was going to happen, now Standard dead. She was not in love with Standard anymore. Right.
Yeah.
I mean, and she never says it, but it's very clear. She's sitting out in the hallway. She's not excited the dude's back. Right. Little nuanced things. I don't know if she was in love with the driver. I think she was appreciating the help and thinking it was a possibility, but who knows what she's thinking? At the most she can be is like 25 in this movie. And Carey Mulligan was 25 when this was released, I think. So she was the right age, and she's got a 6-year-old kid who she's got to look out for. And but yeah, I mean, the minute he does what he feels he has to do, and there's a lot there about the symbolism of the scorpion and with the thing we all know from having seen, oh Jesus, what was the movie with Forrest Whitaker? Crying Game.
Okay.
The frog and the scorpion, we all know that story now from that movie of the scorpion just pursuing its nature, and he's like, well, she's gonna see what I really am, and it's all gonna be over with now. So I'm gonna do this, and nothing is said. The lighting in that scene is some of the best lighting you're gonna find in a film.
It is so memorable.
Yeah.
Again, it reminds me of there are lounges in San Diego that I've been to that have that same sort of, they still have the wood paneled wall effects. And they have that exact same lighting. It's just so perfectly Southern Californian. And it's recreated in that I guess that set of a box of an elevator. And then that beautiful light trick where it dims, and he steps into this parallel reality, and he pops out, the same way that, a flashback can occur in a second clock time, but it can take you through years of existence before he starts doing what he's got to do in there. That was a truly remarkable scene.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's not a scene where I'm like, oh my God, clearly where you're like, oh, the dialogue and this is completely nailing it, and whatever. It's not that. It's not Don Draper telling you to sit down and shut the door. It's but I do think Albert Brooks has a couple speeches in the film that are like, out of the ballpark sort of delivery.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let me ask you to step into the other scene you just mentioned. Like, I think that the dressing room scene, from the moment we see the driver kind of enter the strip club, we've got it turns out to be adult film actress Andy Sandemus in the front. She's on her cell phone. The driver's coming down this long hallway, very much backlit. We just see this sort of shadow come in. He asks her for directions to the dressing room where Cook is. He then enters this room, and it's so hyper lit. If everything was underlit or ambiently lit, this is like just beaming down, and the dancers are all just arrayed like in a way almost like statues. Like I couldn't help but feel, and as they proceed to watch the beating that happens, none of them move, and they're almost like these beautiful statues, like immobile under this like massive, just like overhead, like almost like Klieg light kind of like intensity of light. And it's like, for a moment, like I felt like the lighting there is trying to say like, wait, this is fate. This is like these women are not moving because they accept that this is how the world works.
Yeah.
That they don't get up to defend them. They're not screaming. They're not like, there's a man in the dressing room. No, they're like, this guy is a bad guy. We live in a bad world. Bad things like this happen. Today it's at the end of a Craftsman hammer. Tomorrow it's at the end of a 9mm. Like they accept it. In me, it almost like got this like, not to go like super drama dork here. It almost had like this like Greek chorus kind of thing. Like they are there.
Completely agree.
To stand in for us.
Mm-hmm.
In like just this beautifully lit nudity of like stripped down violence is here. Like violence, attraction, all the things that are dancing on the nerves, like when someone enters a strip club or the liminal space of the erotic. Like all of a sudden they're like, we are here to watch this ancient tableau play out one more time. And I just love that scene so much, because it's just like the richness of the reds, exactly as you call out, and the hot white light, the dancers in their costumes, and then at the center of it, this is just absolute piece of filth man facing an egregiously violent menace. Is just like, I was like, wow. All of a sudden, like all the sort of slowness, all the subtlety, all the smiles, all the winks, all of a sudden, like the world kind of rips in half, and the movie enters its second phase, which is just like the action comes pretty fast and in pretty short order. Like all the bad dudes get their comeuppance within about a 15-20 minute window. And that particular scene seems to be the fuse that lights the driver to go into sort of this like hyperspeed mode. But I thought that scene was just like so well done, and I was floored by it. So please, I would love to know.
No, it's shocking how much I agree with everything you're saying, right down to kind of the eyes of the Greek chorus, like, you know, bearing witness to it. You can almost hear them, like, if they should have lines, right, that they're all saying, it's like, of course this fate has befallen him, you know. Right. These violent
delights will have violent ends, and here, sisters, we bear final witness to the blood spill out. Yeah, it's absolutely that.
And I agree. There is actually, at the halfway mark of the film, is when the pawn shop heist occurs.
Okay.
And so you do have this complete switch of whatever's going on. You know, he does like heist stuff. You know, he's getting in over his head. Now the movie's going to pivot and go into the second wave, because we watched it over 2 nights and we stopped it at about the halfway point. We stopped the movie. We're like, well, we know what happens after this, so let's stop and we'll watch the second half tomorrow night. And I was like, oh my God, this is the halfway point of the film. That totally makes sense. He probably, you know, timed it to hit right here. Right. And yeah, I mean, I do think the thing that was shocking the first time I saw the film, and it's hard to recreate that watching it for a third or fourth time, is you don't know, because I don't carry a weapon, I don't do this, I don't do that, I'm just a driver. You don't know to that point what he's actually capable of. You've just seen the scorpion jacket.
Right.
He knows. I think wherever he was before all this, he did exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Maybe not for the same reasons, but he knows, and that there's a reason he doesn't carry a weapon, and there's a reason he keeps his head down.
Interesting.
And I mean, it doesn't really matter what happens to you. If I'm me and something horrible happens, I'm not suddenly picking up a hammer and going down to Sugar's and taking care of business. Like one, it's not my nature. Two, it's, you know, there's no background of for me to even process things that way. Would just burn the place down, Stephen. No. But with everyone inside, no. But yeah, I do think that there's probably a lot of, you know, the fact that there's no background to the character. You know, he just showed up one day and asked for a job, didn't ask for like a right salary. There's mountains of shit there that we're not supposed to ever know. We're seeing this character in a moment in time. And I think the story is really about him realizing he can use whatever he has to actually help people versus whatever he was doing before that he was kind of hiding out from. And
yeah, I think that's absolutely right. Is like the college track is like a real hero, a real human being.
Yeah.
And Refn has said that this movie is about the driver waking up to being a hero. So we are meant to believe that this event, or the series of events that we see in the story, moves him to being a real hero, in parentheses, and a real human being.
Yeah.
But he has to undergo something. He's clearly going through like a crucible experience that's gonna forge him into the hero. So yeah, for sure, that's that. You brought up Albert Brooks's performance. You know, I gotta be honest, man. I recognize Brooks as a great thespian, but man, that scene where he does Shannon, that I winced through that both times I watched it. And I also find his sort of casual barbarity like really, really, really tough to take. On the other hand, I will grant he's an amazing heel. I do hate him. I do want him absolutely to get what's coming to him. But you said that you thought that he had like something that really stood out as a great scene. So I'd love to know what you thought was us getting peak Albert Brooks here and at this
So
experience.
I do want to also qualify all of this with like Stuart, who's a pal and on the show and whatnot, loves Albert Brooks and watches all this stuff. I've watched like 2 Albert Brooks movies in my life. Like I'm not a guy who's like, oh, let's watch Being There or whatever. Is Being There an Albert Brooks movie? Probably not.
Network News, isn't that one? Isn't that his with
yeah, he's in that. Yeah. That's one of the like 2 I've ever seen.
Okay.
But
Defending Your Life, also he's superb in that.
Yeah, I mean, is it growing up? The when his movies were kind of coming out like once a year or whatever, like the idea of delving into one's neuroses as a matter of entertainment was not something the Steens family rocked with. I'll put it that way.
Sure.
So anyway, I didn't grow up on him. I've never really spun around to catch up on him, but I do think him talking about the facts of life of what's going to happen to the driver at the end.
Agreed. That's a great scene.
Like, look, it's there. I am 100% certain those kinds of speeches have had to been made in a million like restaurants and whatever of people who are like, you fucked up, you're gonna have to die, so what do you want to do to make the absolute best out of all of this? Like, right. There's a chance for at least somebody to end up okay, but I gotta do what I gotta do.
Right.
And if he's been doing this probably since his teens and he's in his 60s here, this is probably the 50th time he's given this speech, right?
Yeah.
And it kind of feels that way. And I dug that about them creating that kind of character for this film. Like, look, he's trying to go legit. The dude just wants to. He had a dream. He's like, I got excited. I was gonna have this car. Like,
yeah.
And you fucked it up, man. Like, it just feels very believable to me as a character.
Yeah, there's a level of like Steinbeck, kind of like Lenny and George, kind of like you could have had this, but you just the wrong people, and that people. Shannon, Shannon was Shannon a lot reminded me of Lane Price from Mad Men. Just like after his suicide, I remember his widow said you had no right to give a man like that dreams. She says to Draper. I felt like that the same way. As like Shannon had no business being associated with gangsters. As proof by his shattered pelvis, courtesy of Nino. He had no business being in that, and because of the wrong people being involved, it came out to where it's you versus me, and at the end of the day, it's going to be me. So yeah, I thought that whole speech in the Chinese restaurant was amazing. All right, so given that we're at that point in the runtime, I have to say, why does the driver knows the guy's full of shit, right? So why does the driver let him stab him? Or I guess my question is, what do you make of the final scene? Why does the driver play it that way? And I guess that's my contrawise. We've seen Albert Brooks' character, kill somebody off quite efficiently. Why does he miss? Why does he not like land a fatal blow on the driver? What's your take?
My read of the physical action of those like 5 seconds is quite the same as yours. I think he knows there's the potential that he's going to get stabbed in the back.
Yeah,
and he tries to move quickly enough because he has a knife too, right?
Right.
And he thinks he's going to get the drop on him, but it's 2 scorpions,
mm-hmm.
and he doesn't pick up the $1 million and drive off with it again after that's over with.
Right. What is that about? what do you
he's done? He never was supposed to be part of the transaction. He never wanted to be. I don't know why he doesn't give it to Carey Mulligan.
Right.
But other than that could potentially cause other problems if the East Coast, the shadowy East Coast mob we never saw, is looking for, they know, okay, the cops found $1 million and this dead guy who we know is associated with us. That closes the loop for them, right?
Right.
Otherwise they keep looking for their $1 million, which seems really expensive to keep doing, by the way. But it's like it's $1 million is a lot of money, but it's not that much money. But yeah, I think that is why he does it. But I think he, even if he suspects he's going to do something, he thinks he's going to have the drop on, this older dude, but he doesn't, because that's how slick Albert Brooks is. Now, I think the question is, the movie doesn't tell us anything other than that he drives off. You have to like go find the Nicholas Winding Refn's interviews to say, oh no, he's fine. He just drives off and he's okay. And he's going to go from adventure to adventure, which Refn says, which is amazing. Like usually directors are like, tee hee, who knows? When I saw it the first time, I thought it was the same as Shane. I thought referencing Shane, frankly. Shane, depending on how you watch Shane, I believe Shane gets on his horse and is dead before the movie's over, and the kid's yelling at him to come back. I think he's yelling at a corpse. And so, and for lack of a horse, our boy is driving off through the night, but he's also not in LA anymore. He's on country 2-lane roads in those final shots going somewhere. So I think we can assume he was going to either die on the road, or I guess he's okay in going from adventure to adventure, but he's going to run across Natasha Lyonne out there somewhere. But he, I'm okay with the ending, and I'm really okay with the shot of Carey Mulligan going to his door, like, what? Like, where are you?
Right.
Like, he's gone without a trace, and I think that's kind of the appropriate ending to this film.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I fully agree with that. Speaking of farewells, how did you take the demise of Nino? I find it a little hard to believe that anybody who doesn't weigh 300 pounds could successfully drown Ron Perlman in the ocean, but in that scene, I saw a lot of influences of Heat. Very much recalled the cat and mouse chase between Pacino and De Niro, and the strobe flashing of LAX. I definitely saw like that kind of situation again. The sort of blinding white light kind of throwing your eyeballs off, so it was hard to see. I thought that was a pretty nice parallel to where the assuredly dazed, shocked, and possibly a few snapped ribs Nino must have been at that moment, that the sort of specter comes out of the darkness to drown him. How did you view that one? Did you think that was a
I mean, there's a few noirs that end on the beach for various characters. Usually it's the end of the film, but I thought it was an appropriate ending. I think that it was very pointed that he had to drive Nino off a cliff and for his car to flip. And believable that how old did he say he was? He says how old he is in the film, and he's not a kid. He's like 58 or something like that.
Sure.
So a 58-year-old dude, no matter what shape he's in, unless he's Tom Cruise, is getting thrown off a cliff in a car he's not buckled in, and is doing his best to stagger away across the sand, which is not an easy thing to do. Against a very motivated Ryan Gosling. I mean, I think it was appropriate that basically it's like, it's not so much Gosling that kills him as the ocean, right? He's holding him down, and likely Nino will wash up on shore somewhere else, down shore. But yeah, I thought it was a really interesting thing. I don't entirely get why he's wearing the other face when he does it.
Yeah, the mask, the stunt mask.
Yeah, that was the bit that, like, I got why he wore it to like look through the window, and maybe even when he was driving. Usually you have that like Batman pulling off the mask to reveal himself to Max in Batman Returns moment of haha, it was me. We're not going to do that in this movie. I get that, but I also don't know why, from a directorial standpoint, they chose to have him continue to obfuscate who he was to the character at that point. Sure,
yeah. No, I agree. It was weird, but I also, in some ways, again, to kind of go back to this question of like, my philosophy nerd credentials here. Like, is he wearing a mask, like almost like an executioner? This isn't personal. This is what you deserve for being shit in the world. And the divine hand of justice says that, I'm not here to pronounce your sentence, which is, GTO to the side of your limo, so I thought that might be it. I couldn't tell.
That actually makes a lot of sense. That makes a ton of sense. Yeah.
Interesting. All right. Well, cool. All right, Ryan, I have a question for you.
Yes.
I was watching this, and my beloved wife came in, and she said, "This movie is so slow. Barack Obama narrating that animal show on Netflix moves faster than this. I'm so bored. Enjoy the movie." And she walked out. And so my question is, and maybe for people who are younger than us, is this a good movie? And if so, why? I'd like to know what your takeaway is on this.
Well, I think whether a movie is slow or not is irrelevant to whether a movie is good or not.
Okay.
I'm someone who will happily sit and watch Stalker. I always refer to that on this podcast, but if you can make it through Stalker, you can make it through anything, my friends. And I'm a person who, for whatever reason, since I was a kid, has processed things that are vibe as being good.
Yeah.
Like, I would rather see stuff that is doing things through nuance and subtlety and all of the things that go into film to tell the story rather than a radio play. Like, how many movies can you watch? A ton of them that you can put on and not look up at.
Right.
You can't do that with this movie. You could. You'd miss a lot.
Absolutely.
And so I think from that standpoint, is it well crafted? I think it's incredibly well crafted. I do think that all crime movies hinge on whether what they're trying to tell us about something other than what's in the actual the text. The subtext is where those movies live or die, and whether or not those stories tell us something more about ourselves or the world or whatever. Does this movie do that? And I think that's a legitimate question. Is it just about itself? I think that no. I think this movie does have potential to speak to people on kind of a higher level about, you can always be a hero and a real human being, and hit someone with a hammer real hard. But I respect that that's not necessarily how people approach film or films. And that might not be how they read the film. And I don't know I don't know what a good movie is anymore in 2023. I can tell you what a bad movie is in 2023. I don't know if I can tell you what a good movie is anymore. Or what comprises one in a year where Tar is up against Everything Everywhere All at Once for Best Picture, against Elvis, against Maverick, against Black Panther, against, like, someone sit me down and tell me why each of those is a quality movie that someone's not going to roll their eyes at. So, it's not a movie for a general audience. It's not Maverick. And I think what it was trying to do, it's trying to hit the same audience that the movies it's referring to liked at a certain point. But, and I think the fact that we can talk about it at this level is remarkable. How many films have you seen in the past year? I don't know how many. You have a baby now, so maybe you've seen 0 movies in the past year, but it can be incredibly hard to talk about film meaningfully, and talk about the technical aspects of it that drive the story. And that's something I particularly get off on. So,
yeah, I think that's where I come out as I do think that it's worth seeing. Absolutely. And actually, to your point, I mean, it's a very small footprint, barely 90 minutes. And to your point is it's the technical aspects serve visual storytelling relentlessly. And that's something that only this medium can do. And I think that's what makes it remarkable. That's why it shouldn't just be, sort of like, oh, that's a thing that happened in 2011. Or that's a movie that came out, adjacent to the rising action of the Infinity Gauntlet saga. It's like no, this is actually something that was going on contemporaneously, but had a different thing to say, and it should be respected for what that was. So I fully agree. I think it's noteworthy. I think look at the career moves adjacent for Carey Mulligan. She had just done An Education. She would she was on. She's about to do Never Let Me Go. Again, another movie that's very, very light on dialogue, but very, very heavy on vibe to tell a mammoth story. Gosling's career has continued to move in interesting ways. I'm thinking particularly with The Good Guys. Comparing this to that, I think you see a pretty remarkable growth as an actor. Obviously, Cranston's right in the middle of his success run. Christina Hendricks was just in the middle of like having Emmys thrown at her. It was a remarkable cast at a remarkable time, telling a remarkable story in a remarkable way. And I think all that is why I would go so far as to say it's a good movie. But I'd also say it's one that requires a little bit of discipline, a little bit of patience to let its style of storytelling to take you where it wants to go.
Yeah, I mean, I would, it's not like the 80s were completely full of these kinds of movies, but I do remember this kind of vibe was something I sought out. I mean, it's not entirely different from what was my favorite movie in kind of my teens, which was Blade Runner. Blade Runner is not people sitting around talking.
No.
You're listening for audio cues. You're fully immersed and kind of. So I think there's a difference between what this movie does and like what Altman does, which I have a very hard time mentally processing Altman movies. I'll be totally honest. Like I go into them and I'm like, it just feels like chaos when I go into them. And these movies tend to hit me wherever my brain is wired of, frankly, kind of how I interpret the world, of I don't necessarily listen to what people are saying. I listen to what they're not saying as much, and I think everybody does that. And to, you look at all the what do they have in their office around them? What do they have in their home? How have they done the lighting in this room? Those are all things that you take in as a person. And that's the kind of stuff that I think when you get into a film that is thoughtful about that stuff versus I just watched Don't Tell Mom the Babysitter's Dead. It's like no thought went into anything, for a major motion picture.
Saw it in the theaters, my friend. So yeah.
And it's easy to kind of crank those movies out, and you don't really care if they're successful. They are, their product, their content, and when I get to see a movie that manages to really try and convey to people in a using more than just dialogue and a storyline that feels familiar, and characters that are just archetypes that they're playing. And I would argue the characters in this are all archetypes, by the way, like to a T. And I think that honestly makes it really easy to understand what the story is in a lot of ways, which is why I was shocked kind of going through reading article after article where those younger than us, I felt, had misinterpreted the film in some ways. And I do think when it came out, they didn't have the reference of kind of the movies that were all vibe, because that was not something the 90s and aughts really did a lot of. And so kind of when a movie started kind of pulling that trick on them, there were people who were genuinely mad that other people liked this movie. I remember that at the time of like, it's just dumb. He just doesn't say anything. And then like hits a guy with a hammer. Like, why am I watching this? I'm like, well, maybe you shouldn't. Like, not every movie's for you. It's okay.
Right. I think you're absolutely right. You referenced earlier American Gigolo, which is, so vibe. I mean, it's, from the VHS cover that I remember in the video store of, the Venetian blinds on Richard Gere to, Blondie with Call Me, to that beautiful Mercedes he's taking down the Pacific Coast Highway in the opening scenes, to the score from Giorgio Moroder. Mm-hmm. It is the formula to drive is not terribly dissimilar from that. It's like, okay, cool. Take one synth icon and mix in one heartthrob and one understated noirish dame who's influenced by him to experiment with some dangerous parts of her erotic identity. Chaos ensues. It definitely plays around in some of those same psychological areas. But yeah, absolutely. And I hadn't thought of it, but absolutely, like thinking about The Keep, which you looked at many moons ago. It's like
I've forced upon people many times. Yeah.
But the tangerine dream of it, the depth of the night, the sort of like, it's Nazis with like Hungarian gold or something. What? No, it's not at all like that. It's a trans-dimensional portal to hell. Oh, what? Dracula? It's got all that plus like a lot of like Moog synthesizers. So, there's definitely something that's more vibe than there is fact in those movies. So I think it's very apt. And I think, you think about Blade Runner and then I think about Blade Runner 2048 starring Gosling, of course.
Yeah.
And, it's like both of those, the Vangelis score is not Call Me. It is a wide, expansive sort of a meditative way of saying, like, come into this LA, come into this rainy, wet LA, and see what it looks like with the Atari building dominating the skyline. I think you're right. Is that this isn't inviting to a big space like Blade Runner is. I think this is inviting to a very intimate space. All the action is very intimate, all the betrayal is very intimate, and violence is very intimate. So I think you're absolutely right. It is a space where you're looking at these archetypes play out a necessary aspect of civilization, and that's what happens.
Yeah, if you ever get a chance, there's an author named David Goodis who was responsible for some of the books that drove the noir movement, and he has one in particular called The Burglar that they did turn into a movie, and I can't remember who's in it except for I think Jane Mansfield is in it. I'm trying to remember it's Dan Duryea.
Yeah.
So you're talking, like 1950, 1951, something like that, I want to say, but maybe later, but the book is all vibe like that. And it's weird to kind of like, and that's kind of Goodis's thing. Like he was writing books that kind of informed the noir movement. And so I hadn't read Goodis when I saw this the first time, but when I kind of came back and watched it this time and saw it was based on a book, it's like someone was a Goodis fan, I think. But the funny thing about the Jane Mansfield version is that is not how the character is described in the book. It is not Jane Mansfield. But anyway,
she has a very singular description, but yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, I don't want the market to get, completely covered in Drive clones. That's not what I'm saying. But I do think that there's room for this kind of stuff. In that, and I don't know exactly why, when some people who are younger than us were watching this, were kind of maybe turning up their nose out a little bit. And I'm like, well, you've grown up on a particular kind of like hero and anti-hero, where they're being a badass like Vin Diesel or whatever is like vindicated in the first minute because you just know they're cool. And you don't really know anything about the driver. He's not particularly cool, and he's a bit of a loser, and then he's like super violent. It's like I don't blame people who are maybe a little turned off, but at the same time, open your mind to what a protagonist can be in a film. So, especially a crime film, which they don't make a ton of they make a ton of crime TV, but they don't make a ton of crime films these days. So,
no, I think our notion of hero, may just be, sure, maybe it's Vin Diesel, but if you look at like the cultural touchstones of Western civilization, the men at Troy in the Iliad are all psychopaths who are willing to burn through tons of men in order to assert that, yes, I am in fact the king of this region, and you should be paying fealty to me. And so it's so bad that like Achilles and Agamemnon are squaring off against each other, and they're on the same side. So, this idea that we have heroes that are entirely separate from being sociopaths is a pretty recent innovation. Just look at any of the kings or queens of medieval Europe, and you'd be hard pressed to find a great distance from somebody who was being sociopathic and heroic at the same time.
I'm just cracking the Prose Edda right now.
Oh, awesome! Great.
It's like, oh my god.
Yeah.
Oh my god. There's no good guys in this thing.
No, it's funny. I just finished reading reading a different edition of Beowulf, and it's like, oh, okay, these noble ring givers, are cracking everyone's head, literally. It's like, okay, right, yeah, these are our cultural heroes. Yeah. So yeah, the idea of goodness was much more malleable. And ironically, malleable literally means able to be beaten with a hammer. So we've gone full circle.
I think that's an excellent place to leave it. Any final thoughts on Drive?
I just want to say is my best memory from this movie is the night that we got to see the Drive tour concert. They came to Rickshaw Stop in San Francisco, and we saw Kavinsky was not there, but we did see College perform Real Hero, Real Human Being, and it was awesome. And I still love the soundtrack. I'm still so thankful for this movie for opening my ears and eyes to the music of Chromatics and later Ruth Radelet solo. I just am so thankful for the gift of Electro Clash kind of inspired art. So between this and the arrangements by John Carpenter from the Carpenter's Son, or that bands like Carpenter Overdrive have done in homage to him, I would just say is that maybe if the movie isn't your thing, the music is very much my thing, and I would encourage anyone who's never really taken a chance to explore that genre, I'd urge you to do so. Give your ears a treat.
Completely agree. I was part of when we were leading up to doing this. I put on the soundtrack in my car when I was driving around town, and I was just like, "Oh my god, why don't I listen to this all the time?" Like,
right.
It's been a while. It had been a few years since I listened to it. It especially having grown up in kind of that period of. I got my first Tangerine Dream record when I was 14 or 15. And it was really cool to kind of see that come back. I'm not sure it's really died out, or if I've gotten old and I'm out of touch, which that can't be true. But I prefer to believe that they're still making this kind of stuff. But it's an absolutely phenomenal soundtrack. The thing that blew me away is M83 is not on the soundtrack.
Right. They were. That was about like 2 years later that M83 really kind of blows up. I remember it was pretty adjacent. But yeah, it was a moment. It was definitely a moment happening there.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for doing this. I was absolutely delighted when you said, you wanted to do this movie. And it was a really good opportunity to kind of return to it, and kind of through the eyes of, 10 more years of watching noir, and, the having done the podcast and kind of knowing what I should be looking at through it. It was a really fun way to rewatch a film. If it's been a while, if it's been a minute, definitely go out and get I have it on Blu-ray, so I didn't look to see if it's streaming or not. I assume it's pretty available.
I rented it through our Amazon, but I'm definitely hoping that we're approaching a time for a 4K re-release. I do think that this movie is beautiful enough to merit that kind of attention. And it would look so great just on the big screen. I'm hoping that the Museum of Moving Image will do a 35 millimeter print version of it, just to see these amazing scenes that big would be a real treat. But regardless, yes, whatever format, please do take the opportunity.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, thank you so much, and good luck with the baby.
Thank you so much. Yeah, and I look forward to our nenext one. Hopefully, I'm going to steer us into some novel genre that we haven't explored just yet.
I'm here for it, man.
All right, awesome.
All right, thanks everybody. Bye-bye.
that about wraps it up for this edition of The Signal Watch, a production of the League of Melbotus. Thanks for sticking with us. If you enjoyed the podcast, we invite you to drop on by the Signal Watch blog, where you'll find write-ups of a wide variety of movies and more. We'd love to hear from you, so find us online and let us know what you think. Whether you prefer email, blog comments, or social media, we'll be happy to hear from you. We'll be back soon with more exceedingly high-quality content. So, until next time, God damn it, babies, you've got to be kind.